Ever feel like uh, the world of chemical processing, it's like this massive machine, right? You're just seeing like one tiny part of it. Well, today we're grabbing the blueprints because we are diving deep into what it means to be a chemical processing plant controller.
And it's a role that has, well, it's really changed dramatically. We're not just talking about like turning valves anymore.
Right. This RoleCatcher guide, I gotta say, it kind of blew my mind. They're talking about automation, robotics.
Mm.
They even mentioned AI being used in chemical plants now.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine like using data to predict when equipment's going to fail before it even happens. That's the kind of power a modern plant controller has with data analysis. They can prevent downtime, save money, keep everything running smoothly. It's a whole different ballgame now.
That's wild. So it's this blend of like hands-on experience, but also these really high-level tech skills.
Exactly. You need that deep understanding of the chemical reactions, the raw materials, all the equipment. But then you layer on the ability to use software, analyze data, and really optimize that whole process. It's about making that plant hum at peak efficiency.
Okay. That sounds intense, but like incredibly cool too.
Mhm.
What about the actual day-to-day though? What's it like being on the floor of a chemical plant these days?
Well, the guide breaks it down into a few key areas. First, monitoring and controlling that production process. That's a big one. It's all about making real-time adjustments based on data streams, troubleshooting any problems, and constantly making sure everything aligns with, those super strict quality standards.
So problem-solving skills are like non-negotiable.
Absolutely. And because you're dealing with potentially hazardous materials, a deep understanding of and respect for safety regulations, that's non-negotiable too. It's paramount, really.
Right. You're responsible for your team's safety and the surrounding environment.
Yeah.
And speaking of responsibility, it also sounds like this role comes with some serious career upside.
Oh, absolutely. The guide talks about the potential to climb the ranks.
Wow.
You could start as a junior operator and potentially end up running the entire plant one day. And the demand for these skilled plant controllers, it's only going up.
Okay, so let's say someone's listening and they're thinking, this sounds like my kind of challenge. What should they be focusing on? What skills are absolutely essential to make it in this field?
A strong foundation in chemistry is obviously key, but it actually goes beyond that. You're talking process engineering, understanding mechanical and electrical systems. It's really a multidisciplinary kind of role,
There's like a whole engineering degree rolled into one job.
essentially. And that's why a lot of people in this field have backgrounds in like chemical engineering, process engineering, even industrial engineering. But then this is where it gets really interesting.
Hit me with it. What's the unexpected skill set here?
Well, the guide specifically mentions being comfortable with programming languages, things like Python or MATLAB.
Oh, programming. For a chemical plant. I never would have guessed that.
It's becoming more and more common. These plants are complex systems, and being able to use code to analyze data, model processes, even automate certain tasks. Well, that's a game changer.
Okay, I'm officially intrigued. What's fascinating to me is how this role blends, like that traditional chemistry knowledge with cutting-edge tech. It's not just about beakers and test tubes anymore. So you've got the skills, maybe even the degree about actually landing the job. What does the interview process look like for a chemical processing plant controller?
Oh, the guide actually includes a whole section on interview prep. Be prepared to really talk about your experience with chemical processing equipment, how you approach those safety protocols, how you prioritize tasks under pressure, things like that.
Makes sense. They want to know you can handle the responsibility.
Exactly. And be ready to really showcase your in-depth knowledge. You might get grilled on specific chemical processes, types of equipment, even like emerging industry trends. It's not just about saying you're a hard worker, you got to back it up.
So it's a combination of technical expertise, but also being able to think on your feet. It seems like continuous learning is, well, pretty essential in this field.
Absolutely. Whether it's attending conferences, taking more advanced courses, or even getting certified, a good plant controller never stops learning. But there's another layer to this role we haven't even touched on yet.
Oh,
Mm.
don't leave me hanging. What else is there?
It's one thing to, manage the technical side of things, but what about the human element? This guide actually dedicates a big chunk to discussing the ethical considerations that come with holding such a critical position in a chemical plant.
Now that's something I'm really curious to unpack. It's not just about production. It's about people and the planet, too.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting.
This is definitely a deep dive, and we're just getting started. We'll be back in a moment to explore the ethical landscape of this role. Don't go anywhere. Okay, so we're back and we're really getting into like the heart of what it means to be a chemical processing plant controller,
Yeah.
in today's world. It's not just about like the technical know-how, it's about responsibility on a whole new level.
Precisely. And that's where all these ethical considerations, they really come into play, you see, because you're dealing with materials that, well, they have the potential for real harm if they're not handled properly.
Right. We're talking about chemicals here, not cupcakes.
Yeah.
So how does this guide address that? What's like the first thing that comes to mind when you think about ensuring safety in this kind of environment?
Well, it really stresses that a plant controller, they need to be on top of all those safety regulations, absolutely. But it goes beyond just, checking off boxes on a list, right? It's about really instilling this culture of safety within the entire team. It's about making sure everyone is fully trained, fully equipped, and honestly empowered to prioritize safety every single day.
So it's leadership as much as it is rule following. It's about leading by example.
Exactly. It really does trickle down, when that team, they see the plant controller taking safety seriously, well, it sets the tone for the entire operation.
Now, this guide also dives into something called good manufacturing practices. It's often shortened to GMPs. And I'll admit that one always makes me think of like, someone with a clipboard inspecting a bakery or something.
Sure.
So how does GMP actually apply to, a chemical plant?
Think of it this way. Just like you wouldn't want some stray ingredient ending up in your birthday cake. Right. Well, the chemical processing industry, it demands incredibly precise adherence to all those procedures. GMPs, those are the detailed guidelines, the regulations that guarantee both the quality of what's being produced, but also the safety of everyone involved.
So a plant controller needs to be like a real stickler for the rules, making sure those GMPs are followed, to the letter.
Absolutely. They are responsible for making sure everything is done by the book, every single step of the way. And it's not just about like the internal regulations either, right? There are external factors they have to consider too, like environmental regulations.
Right, because a chemical plant has a big footprint.
Yeah.
It's not just the product itself, but that whole production process that can impact the environment. What does the guide say about, minimizing that impact?
Well, that's where sustainability comes in. And it's a huge, a growing concern, really, within the entire industry. The guide talks about things like reducing waste, minimizing those emissions, and really trying to adopt more environmentally friendly processes wherever possible. It's not just about making the product, it's about making it responsibly.
So how does a plant controller actually contribute to that? I mean, are there like specific strategies they can implement?
Oh, there are a lot of exciting innovations happening in this space, and the guide actually highlights a few. It could be something as simple as switching to renewable energy sources, or maybe implementing those closed loop systems to recycle waste. We're even seeing companies starting to explore bio-based alternatives to traditional chemicals.
That's really encouraging. It sounds like this industry is becoming a lot more aware of its impact and actively looking for ways to, minimize it as much as possible.
Absolutely. And a plant controller who's truly passionate about sustainability, well, they can really make a difference.
And that ties into what we were discussing earlier about leadership, right? It's not just about keeping the wheels turning, it's about driving positive change.
Precisely. And a big part of that is, really fostering a culture where everyone on the team, they feel empowered to speak up about safety concerns, environmental concerns, really anything that could impact the ethical operation of that plant.
So open communication is key.
Absolutely. A good plant controller, they understand that a team that feels heard, that feels respected, well, they're going to be way more engaged. They're going to be more likely to raise those concerns and ultimately contribute to a much safer, much more responsible operation.
It's about creating that sense of shared responsibility.
Right.
Everyone has a stake in making sure that things are done the right way.
Exactly. And that's what makes this role, so fascinating. It's this blend of, that technical expertise, those leadership skills, and this deep sense of responsibility, not just for the production, but for the people and the planet too.
Now, this wouldn't be a true deep dive if we didn't address, the elephant in the room, the financial aspect. It's one thing to talk about safety and sustainability, but at the end of the day, a chemical plant, it needs to be profitable. So what does the guide have to say about like the financial responsibilities of a plant controller?
You're absolutely right. We can't ignore that bottom line. And that's where the plant controller's role, it gets even more interesting.
All right, we are back for the final part of this deep dive into chemical processing plant controllers. And it sounds like things are about to get financially fascinating.
That's right. This is where we see that link, that crucial connection between the technical expertise and that business savvy. A plant controller can't just understand the chemistry, they've got to understand how to optimize for efficiency and profitability too.
So it's not enough to just make the product. You have to make it as cost effectively as possible.
Exactly. Think of it like this. Every decision a plant controller makes, whether it's tweaking a process parameter or maybe investing in some new equipment, it all has these financial ripples, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're responsible for minimizing waste, maximizing yield, and really just squeezing every ounce of value out of that entire operation.
That sounds like a constant balancing act.
It absolutely is. And that's where all those data analysis skills we talked about earlier, they become, well, really crucial. A plant controller has to be on top of tracking all those key metrics, identifying any trends, and then using that data to make smart decisions that directly impact the company's bottom line.
So paint me a picture here. What's an example of how a plant controller might actually use data to really improve financial performance?
Okay, let's say they're looking at the data and they notice a recurring dip in yield during a certain phase of production. By digging a little deeper, they might discover that, oh, this dip, it correlates with fluctuations in the raw material supply. So then they can maybe work on securing a more consistent source or even look at adjusting the process so it's not as sensitive to those variations. See what I mean?
Right. So they're not just, crunching numbers in a spreadsheet. They're using that data to tell a story, and a story that directly translates into dollars and cents.
Precisely. And it's not just about reacting to what's happening right now in the present. It's also about kind of anticipating the future. A good plant controller, they're going to be analyzing market trends, looking at emerging technologies, and then making strategic investments that are going to position the company for long-term success.
So they need to have that big picture thinking. It's about being a leader in the plant, but also a strategic thinker for, the whole company.
Exactly. They might be the ones championing a new technology, even if it's a big investment up front, because they've run the numbers and they can show how it's going to pay off big time down the line through things like increased efficiency, reduced waste, maybe even being able to create entirely new products.
This is really eye-opening. It makes you realize that a chemical processing plant controller, they're like the conductor of an orchestra, right? I mean, they have to make sure that all these different sections are working in harmony to create something, something beautiful and profitable.
I love that analogy. It really does capture the complexity, but also the artistry of this role. It's about blending that deep scientific knowledge with real business acumen, those leadership skills, and of course, that understanding of all the ethical considerations that we talked about before.
It's definitely a career path that demands a lot, but clearly it offers just as much in return. And we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? From the technical parts of those chemical processes to those ethical dilemmas and the financial responsibilities. It's been a true deep dive.
It really has. And I still feel like we've just scratched the surface of, what there is to learn about this field. It's such a dynamic and evolving field.
Well, that's the beauty of a deep dive, right? It sparks that curiosity and really ignites a passion for continuous learning. So for our listeners who are now feeling ready to dive in even deeper, I definitely recommend checking out all those resources we mentioned, especially the ones in that RoleCatcher guide. It's a perfect place to start exploring.
Couldn't agree more. And don't underestimate the power of connecting with people who are actually out there working in the field, right? Those firsthand insights and experiences, they're invaluable, really.
Great advice. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. A huge thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this journey today.
Until next time, keep asking those questions, stay curious, and never stop exploring this fascinating world that we live in.